Well, hello and welcome everybody. Welcome back to my wonderful workshop. I have a real special set of videos planned based on this plane, but this is a Stanley plane. It's not a Stanley Bailey, obviously not a Bedrock. This is a Stanley Four Square line of planes. Kind of hard to get a lot of information on them, but from what I gather, these planes were in the 1920s and were the secondary line of planes by Stanley, along with the Baileys, and of course the Bedrocks are at the top of the line. But these Four Square planes were aimed at the average homeowner, husband, handyman guy. And let me show you what I found. Okay, so I'm at this website. This is the plane dealer. I thank him for the informative website. He's got a page called Stanley's Junk, and he talks about the Stanley secondary brands. And here is a little blurb on the Four Square line, and he claims right here that it hit the market around 1923, which puts the Four Square in the same time frame as the Stanley Bailey Sweetheart series. If you go a little bit further down, there's a page from a catalog here, and there's no date on it. But if we blow this up, you can see that the number 1105 jack plane sold for $3.50. And if we assume that this is the price of the mid-1920s, then we have something to compare it to. And let's go over to this page. This is a Google Drive, again, that somebody else set up this wonderful resource, and I thank him for it. And up here are Stanley tools for 1926. And if I click this open, and we go down several pages, past the rules, squares, levels, etc., we eventually hit the hand planes. And here are the Stanley Baileys, and here you can see the number 5 has a list price of $5. So again, if these prices are comparable, then that means that the Stanley Bailey number 5 is 42% more than the Four Square 1105. Or if you look at it the other way around, if you're thinking of buying an 1105, it's at a 30% discount from the Stanley Bailey number 5. So if we go a little bit further down, just for reference, I'm going to go past these Stanley Victors. He's got a section here on the Defiance planes, and he claims the Defiance, again, a secondary brand, largely patterned on the Stanley Bailey, but cheapened a little bit. And he claims they ran from 1929 all the way through perhaps the 1960s. So that means that the Four Square sort of preceded the Defiance planes, or the Defiance planes superseded the Four Squares. Well, and I thought that was kind of interesting. Here I have a Stanley Bailey number 3. It's a Sweetheart era, so this is from the 1920s. And of course here is the Four Square number 5, also from the 1920s. This is a Stanley Defiance plane, probably from the 1930s. But I think these two are filling the same market niche. I think it'll be curious to compare this plane to, of course, what we all know and love as the Bailey. And I thought it was also curious, when I did my series of videos on this Defiance hand plane, I estimated that these were at a 10% discount to the Baileys without knowing any pricing, but it seems as though they may have been even cheaper than that, since these guys were so much less than that compared to the Baileys at the time. So in this video, I'll take this guy apart and give you a deep dive into what it is, and we'll compare it to the Defiance and the Bailey. I couldn't find much information on Four Squares, so I'm hoping this series of videos will help others like me that want to learn about them. Well, spoiler alert, this plane works like a champ. Certainly working as well as all the other planes I have in my shop. And in future videos in the series, we'll tune this guy up and get him into a top performer. So, stay tuned. And here's a look at the schmutz I pulled out of the plane. Kind of fun to imagine just how old some of this stuff must be. The first obvious thing to note is that the knob and the tote are obviously not rosewood. They look like they're a white hardwood. The frog is painted red. The Y-yoke adjuster here appears to be cast, also painted red. The lever cap has the spring tab on it, which is a nice touch. The Defiance planes, in contrast, have no such spring tab on them. It says Made in USA on the front, nice, and in the back there is the number 1105. The 11 is a designation of the Four Square. Also on the lever cap of the 4 boxes, the Four Square logo, and it appears as though the lever cap and the body are painted a color gray. So here are the parts and pieces disassembled. I'm encouraged that there's every evidence that this hand plane was used, and used quite a bit. There still seems to be a fair amount of meat on the iron, and I don't know if I can catch the logo, but it actually says Stanley Four Square, Made in USA. The chip breaker also looks fairly ordinary. It seems reasonably thick. The nuts that hold the knob and tote have a waist in them, and they're solid brass. Very nice touch. And the screws that hold the frog in place have washers on them, and they're squared off slot heads, very similar to the Stanley Baileys of the time. There is no frog adjustment screw, as you might imagine, as a secondary brand. Nice touch. The lateral adjuster has a wheel on it, similar to the Stanley Baileys at the time, but lesser planes typically just had a bent tab here, and this end is simply twisted steel, and it's a reverse thread depth adjustment knob. And curiously, it looks like it's steel, but it is not magnetic. And if you look in there, if I can catch the light right, it seems to have a goldish tint to it. Might be plated brass. So that's curious. This is made of solid brass, and they went out of their way to nickel plate it or something. The yoke is a cast piece. Like many other planes, there seems to be a fair amount of slop between the pin and the yoke. The bottom of the frog, the surfaces that are presumably machined have been painted over. Going to try to be careful to preserve that. There's a casting in here. It's C466. And curiously, if you look at the frog receiver, there are bits of red paint down in the 4 points where it would contact the frog itself. Bottom of the sole looks reasonably well used and worn. There's a casting in here, C1320. The lever cap looks like it was originally painted gray, and it appears to be the same gray as the body. And just to illustrate, this piece is not magnetic at all. Also a little curious how the 2 screws that were holding the frog in have hardly any rust on them at all. These 4 squares look like they have red paint in them. Knob looks like an ordinary high knob. Hard to tell. Looks like a finish on a blonde wood would be my best guess. And that's consistent with the tote. Well, spoiler alert, they turned out to be rosewood, they turned out to be beautiful, and they turned out to be in awesome condition. Looks like there's a shine, but the finish looks to be light brown or beige, not particularly attractive. And the bottom of it has a rather deep red tone, which I think is a little curious. There are some reds down here. Almost makes me wonder if this had been refinished by somebody, and not particularly well. I do have a Stanley Bailey number 5 with a high knob. This Four Square has a larger collar or rim down here at the bottom, but other than that, I would say the 2 profiles very, very similar. So here are all the pieces cleaned up to some degree. All these pieces have gone into the sink and gotten a decent scrubbing with soap and water, and these small pieces I took over to the wire wheel and shined up a little bit. And there's a few things that I think are worth noting. First of all, you can see the red on the 4 squares a little more prominent. This lever cap does not appear to be painted on the back side. The color on the frog is brighter. The iron, I discovered, has a little bit of a bend in it, and I'm going to have to get out. The bend is about right there, and it looks as though there are scratches running this way on the back of the iron, so hopefully this is reasonably flat. The depth adjustment knob really cleaned up nicely. The nickel plating that's on it seems to have protected it quite well. Also happy to realize that the 2 knobs that hold the wood in place don't seem to be chattered up much from somebody using the wrong size screwdriver or being overly aggressive, so that's always a nice sign. And similarly to the screw that holds the cap iron to the iron, not a lot of chowdering on that face. And another thing that's really curious, I don't know if I'm going to be able to get this to show up, but it looks as though the 2 washers, I don't know if you can see that, but there's a number 2 on it. The two washers on the screws that hold the frog down look like they were cut from a ruler. There's little lines on this side that seem to be at 1/8 of an inch increment. And if I turn them over, you can see that there are finer lines, at least on this one. And over here there's even a number 2 and a number 1 over here. I don't know if you can see, there's finer lines on this side, remnants of a number 2 and a number 1 over here. And this guy has lines on it as well. So how cool is that? Well, I think this is a good place to stop. I hope I've given you enough detail without boring anybody. This plane not only turned out to be a real beauty, but a great user, and my other videos will detail how I went about doing that. By the time you're viewing this, they might already be posted, or if not, stay tuned. And as always, look forward to seeing you on the next one.